Now, I've spent the better part of 70 years looking for what I call unbreachable moats. In the world of business, a moat is that special something that keeps your competitors at bay while you sit inside the castle and collect the checks. It's a durable competitive advantage. It's what separates a great business from a mediocre one. And for a century, the United States owned the biggest moat in human history. It was called the Panama Canal. We built it, we owned it, and we decided who got to use the shortcut between the oceans. That single piece of concrete was the dividend-paying stock that funded the American century. But as I sit here in early 2026, I have to tell you something that the folks in Washington don't want to hear. The dividend has stopped and the moat has been moved. So here's the reality. Donald Trump just threatened fire and fury against our northern neighbor because Canada did something we didn't think was possible. They physically, infrastructurally locked the United States out of a $900 billion Arctic shipping corridor. This isn't a diplomatic spat or a minor trade disagreement. This is a total strategic lockout. While the U.S. State Department was busy polishing their shoes for another round of maritime law debates, Mark Carney was out in the world closing the ultimate joint venture. He didn't go to the United Nations to beg for permission. He went to the global shipping boardrooms with a contract that turned our 31 closest allies into his private shareholders. You see, in the world of capital allocation, there is something called distraction cost. It's what happens when you spend your time chasing squirrels while a competitor is building a massive factory in your backyard. For 30 years, the United States was distracted. We were distracted by wars in the Middle East, by domestic political theater, and by an arrogance that believed we didn't need to build anything because we were America. We spent 3 decades telling Canada they didn't own the Northwest Passage. We said it was global water. We sent lawyers to conferences to explain why Canada had no right to regulate it. And while we were talking, the ice was melting. Canada didn't waste time arguing the law. They waited until the ice turned into water and then they built a gate. Think about the Panama Canal for a moment. Right now, it's a dying asset. Historic droughts have turned that shortcut into a bottleneck. Shipping companies are currently paying $4 million per vessel just to skip the line. It's a crisis. The Arctic was supposed to be the American answer. It was supposed to be our next great infrastructure project. But look at the scoreboard. The United States currently operates exactly 2 functional polar icebreakers. Russia has over 50. Canada just finished building an entire fleet. We are the nation that built the Hoover Dam and the interstate highway system, but when it came to the most important trade route of the 21st century, we essentially decided to stay in the locker room while the game was being played. This $900 billion Arctic corridor isn't a proposal, it's a reality. It's 8 deep-water ports, a navigation architecture that covers thousands of miles, and a fiber optic network that is currently the fastest way to move data from London to Tokyo. It cuts 40% off the shipping time between Asia and Europe. Imagine you're a CEO in Shanghai or Hamburg. You have 2 choices. You can take the old road through the Suez Canal, which is slow, expensive, and currently surrounded by regional instability, or you can take the Canadian highway, which is faster, cheaper, and managed by a nation that actually built the road. But here is where the 11-minute scandal comes in. When the licensing framework was announced, American shipping giants went to the White House in a panic. Trump's response was to demand access by executive order. But Carney read the fine print. He found that the U.S. had spent 20 years defunding our own Arctic projects while subsidizing pipelines that are now useless. Carney didn't just build a port, he built a trap. He delivered a line that I think will be the epitaph of American trade. You don't get to use what you tried to take. That's a mic drop for the history books. For 30 years, the U.S. tried to take the Arctic through legal bullying and diplomatic threats. Canada didn't fight back with words. They built a toll booth so advanced and so well supported by the rest of the world that the U.S. is now the only car stuck at the gate without a pass. Reality doesn't negotiate with press conferences. In the investment world, we have a saying, when a person with money meets a person with experience, the person with the experience ends up with the money, and the person with the money ends up with the experience. Well, Washington just got a whole lot of experience. While the U.S. State Department was busy polishing their shoes for another round of maritime law debates, Mark Carney was out in the world closing the ultimate joint venture. He didn't go to the United Nations to beg for permission. He went to the global shipping boardrooms with a contract that turned our 31 closest allies into his private shareholders. Now let's look at the licensing heist for what it really is, a masterclass in contractual execution. Canada didn't just build the ports, they built a legal toll booth that functions like a high-end country club. If you want to play on the course, meaning if you want to use the icebreakers, the navigation buoys, and the emergency rescue stations that make the Arctic safe, you have to pay the dues. But the dues aren't just in dollars. The price of entry is a signature on a piece of paper that formally recognizes the Northwest Passage as Canadian internal waters. This is where the oracle in me really admires the move. Canada created a pay-to-play sovereignty deal. They told the world's major powers, you can save 40% on your shipping costs between London and Tokyo, but you have to admit that Uncle Sam's legal theory is wrong. And one by one, the dominoes fell. Japan, South Korea, the European Union, India, and even the United Kingdom, our supposed special relationship partner, all looked at the math and decided that a faster trade route was worth more than a decades-old American legal protest. Think about that. 31 nations have now signed binding commercial contracts that effectively render the U.S. position irrelevant. We are currently the only major power on Earth claiming the Arctic is an international strait, while every single one of our competitors has filed a formal recognition of Canadian authority just to get a shipping license. Canada didn't win this argument in a courtroom, they won it at the shipping desk. They made sovereignty a prerequisite for profitability. And in my experience, profitability wins that fight every time. But the heist wasn't just about moving containers of sneakers and car parts. It was about the bits and bytes. Beneath those freezing waters, Canada has quietly laid what I call the digital Silk Road. It's a massive undersea fiber optic network that represents the shortest data link between the Atlantic and Pacific financial hubs. In the world of high-frequency trading, speed is the only thing that matters. If your data has to travel through the old, crowded southern cables while your competitor is using the Canadian high-speed rail version of the internet, you're not just losing time, you're losing money. And here's the kicker. To lease capacity on that cable, you need the same license. The United States isn't just being physically locked out of the ocean. We are being digitally throttled. American tech giants are currently watching their competitors in Europe and Asia move data at speeds they can't legally access. This is the 11-minute scandal in reverse. While Trump was announcing his executive order, the last cable segment was being spliced. By the time the ink was dry on the president's demand, the network was live. Mark Carney's 8 words, "You don't get to use what you tried to take," weren't just about oil tankers. They were about the very bits and bytes that power the 2026 global economy. The irony here is so thick you could cut it with an ice saw. The United States has spent 30 years asserting legal rights under the law of the sea, a treaty that our own Senate has refused to ratify since the 1980s. We've been like a person trying to claim a right of way on a road while refusing to pay for a driver's license. Canada saw that hypocrisy and used it as a strategic lever. They didn't try to change our minds, they just made our minds irrelevant. They built a private utility and told the world, if you want the benefits of our investment, you follow our rules. Power isn't just about having the biggest navy, it's about who owns the dock. Now, anyone who's followed my career knows I'm a big fan of compound interest. It's been called the eighth wonder of the world. But there's a dark side to compounding that they don't teach you in a sunny economics class, and that's compound disadvantage. It's what happens when you're on the wrong side of a structural shift. In year 1, it's a nuisance. In year 5, it's a crisis. In year 10, it's an extinction event. And as I look at the American shipping industry today, the compounding has already begun. You see, infrastructure creates its own gravity. When Canada built those 8 deep-water ports and that fleet of heavy icebreakers, they weren't just pouring concrete, they were bending the global supply chain. If you're a logistics manager for a major retailer in New York and you see that your competitor is getting their spring inventory 2 weeks earlier and 20% cheaper because they're using the Canadian Arctic corridor, what do? You don't call the State Department to ask about maritime law. You find a way to get on that route. But if you're an American company, you're currently barred from entry. This is the infrastructure trap. The United States is currently trying to compete in a 2026 global economy using 20th century bottlenecks. While the rest of the world is using the high-speed rail of the ocean, we're still stuck on the dirt road of the Panama and Suez canals. And here's the kicker. The more successful the Canadian corridor becomes, the harder it is for us to catch up. Those 31 nations I mentioned, their transit fees are currently funding the expansion of the very infrastructure that excludes us. Every Japanese container ship that pays a license fee is effectively buying a brick for a wall that keeps American ships out. I've seen this movie before in the business world. It's what happens when a legacy player refuses to invest in a new technology because they're too busy protecting their old monopoly. By the time they realize the world has moved on, the new player has the scale, the data, and the customers. Canada has the scale. They have the 31-nation joint venture, and they have the mic drop moral high ground because they did the work while we did the talking. Donald Trump's response to this has been to reach for the old strongman playbook. He's threatened sweeping sanctions against Canadian Arctic industries. He's talked about revoking Canada's status as a trusted partner. But you have to ask yourself, what are you actually sanctioning? You can't sanction a physical port out of existence. You can't tariff an icebreaker into disappearing. Those assets have mass. They have permanence. Sanctions work on paper, but they don't work on concrete. If we sanction the Canadian corridor, we aren't hurting Canada. We're just ensuring that our own companies are even more disadvantaged while the rest of the world continues to use the route. The math of this is brutal. American shipping companies are projecting losses in the tens of billions over the next decade. But it's not just the shipping companies. It's the manufacturers. It's the farmers. If an American farmer is trying to export grain to Asia and his logistics costs are 40% higher than a competitor using the Arctic, he's not just less profitable, he's out of business. This is how a superpower begins to erode from the inside out. It's not a sudden crash, it's a slow-motion bankruptcy of strategic positioning. Mark Carney's 8 words, "You don't get to use what you tried to take," are the most expensive words ever spoken in North American history. We didn't lose the Arctic because we were outfought. We lost it because we were out-invested by a neighbor who saw the future more clearly than we did. Now, I've seen a lot of CEOs try to manage by memo when the quarterly results start looking like a disaster. They think that if they just change the mission statement or issue a bold new directive, the physical reality of their failing factory will somehow fix itself. But in the world of hard assets and global logistics, a proclamation is just a piece of paper. Donald Trump's latest plan to declare the Northwest Passage an international strait by executive order is the ultimate executive order fantasy. It's an attempt to use a pen to dismantle 1,000 miles of concrete, steel, and fiber optic cable. And let me tell you, as a man who's read a lot of balance sheets, the concrete doesn't care about the pen. You see, the legal status of a trade route isn't determined by a presidential decree in Washington. It's determined by who's standing on the dock. If the United States tries to send a cargo ship through that corridor without a Canadian license, it isn't just a diplomatic protest, it's a physical impossibility. Unlike the open ocean, the Arctic is a maze. You need the Canadian icebreakers to lead the way. You need the Canadian ports for refueling. You need the Canadian navigation systems to keep you from hitting an iceberg. If you don't have the Arctic Pass, you aren't challenging sovereignty. You're just a stranded vessel waiting for a rescue. The Pentagon knows this. Behind the scenes, the military leadership is reportedly in a state of quiet panic. They've been asked to plan freedom of navigation operations, but they've had to tell the White House that the Arctic isn't the South China Sea. You can't sail a destroyer through a frozen labyrinth against a NATO ally that 31 of your other friends have already sided with. It's a provocation with zero strategic upside. If we try to force our way in, we aren't liberating a trade route, we're just isolating ourselves from the very alliance that was supposed to protect us. But here is the black swan event that really keeps the oracle awake at night. In the world of business, if you treat your best supplier like an enemy, they're going to find a new customer. And that's exactly what's happening in Ottawa. Because we've locked ourselves out of the corridor, Canada has started looking east. They've begun discussing a Polar Silk Road partnership with China. Canada sits on the world's most significant untapped reserves of lithium, cobalt, and nickel, the rare earth minerals that are the oil of the 21st century. Those minerals were supposed to be the foundation of a North American fortress economy. Instead, because we pushed Canada into a corner over a shipping license, those minerals are now being traded for Chinese investment in the Arctic corridor. Trump's America First strategy has accidentally created a China-Canada bridge over the top of the world. We tried to take the Arctic by bullying an ally, and instead we lost the most important resource play of the next 50 years. We're currently watching the great decoupling happen, but it's not the U.S. decoupling from China, it's our closest neighbor decoupling from us. The United States just lost the most important infrastructure moat of the new century, not because we were outspent, but because we forgot how to build. We spent 30 years on distractions, while Canada spent 5 years pouring concrete. We focused on the theory of power while they focused on the fact of infrastructure. And in the world of global trade, facts beat theories every single time. Mark Carney's 8 words, but you don't get to use what you tried to take, and I will be the epitaph of this era. They are a reminder that in business and in geopolitics, you cannot treat an ally like a branch office and then expect them to save you a seat at the table. Canada built the port, the world signed the license, and the United States is standing on the shore holding a legal brief and an executive order, watching the ships go by. The American frontier didn't close with a bang, it closed with a click of a digital lock on an Arctic gate. We're now the uninsured driver of the global economy, stuck on the old roads while the rest of the world moves 40% faster. The question isn't whether we can afford to join the corridor. The question is whether we can survive the century if we don't. Trump tried to win the Arctic with a demand. He lost it to an ally with a better plan and a longer timeline.